Greetings, YouTube. Today we'll be talking about Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood, and the Prison of Belief by Lawrence Wright. This is a rare book for me because Mr. Wright is an excellent author, and it was a compelling read, and I enjoyed reading his style. But the book became increasingly depressing as I went through it, so it was kind of like moving through mud. It got thicker as I went. I wanted to get to my destination, but it got harder and harder the further I went along. Now, I didn't have a positive view of Scientology to begin with. One of the reasons I bought the book because of the topic was covering. Um, and I can remember when the death of Hubbard was announced. From my friend Greg and I had a point of contention. My friend Greg had felt that Hubbard had been dead for years, and they'd just been passing off all of his statements that he wrote by someone else and just said he had done it. And I thought that when he died, he had probably actually still alive on a beach in Belize with a blonde and a martini. Apparently, we were both wrong. He actually died. There actually were medical people involved in the process. They took blood samples and fingerprints. So yeah, he was dead. Um, no autopsy was performed, however, because he had a signed document saying that it was against his religious beliefs. L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction author, and I actually really enjoyed the book Battlefield Earth. I read it twice. It's a 1,000-page book. I read it twice. And apparently it's Mitt Romney's favorite novel, which is bizarre, but I took it for what it was. Campy space opera. I mean, the bad guys are called Cyclos, and he had a hard-on the size of a redwood against psychology and psychiatry. So it was kind of transparent. But I still enjoyed the book because it was campy science fiction space opera. And that's what I took it as. I always thought he was a con man. I didn't realize that other than a con man, he was a criminal on a whole lot of levels. And he helped create an empire that has ruined lives and bilked people of billions. What do I mean by this? Well, he lied about his military record, flat out. He said things that he did that didn't happen. He said that he and his crew on a ship off the Pacific coast sunk 2 submarines. There were no submarines sunk. Not only do the military say that the U.S. military say that there was no submarine sunk, but the Japanese military said that there were no submarines sunk, and there were never any submarines in the area at the time that he was patrolling the area. He lied about his injuries in the war. He lied about his education. He lied to the women he loved. Whether he loved them or not, I don't know. He was a raging misogynist. He was a bigamist. He married one second woman while he was still married to the first one. He, at best, was a neglectful father, and he treated his children horribly. In fact, his namesake, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., eventually changed his name to Ronald DeWalt and completely divorced himself from the family whatsoever. That tells you a lot when your namesake changes their name and wants nothing to do with you or your history. He kidnapped the daughter from his second relationship, his second marriage, and used her as a bargaining chip against his wife. He actually had cult members kidnap his own daughter and hide her somewhere. He was a child abuser, locking children in a chain vault on a boat for days with nothing but water and food, no blanket, no protection, nothing. He tormented people, having them push a peanut across a deck until their face was rubbed raw from the deck. He threw someone off a 4-story high deck into the ocean and eventually threw people off the lowest deck as part of their punishment cycle. His cult eventually had internal police retrieval squads, or when people blew, which is what they called it, and some said that when someone blew, they ran away. They would know everything about a cult member, everything. They would have their license, their social security numbers, their credit card numbers, all of their bank information. They would know their hobbies, their friends, their families, everything. They would actually send out teams of people to harass individuals who spoke out against Scientology. They are quite possibly the most litigious religion on the planet. Endlessly harassing people, making up crimes, trying to get them put into mental hospitals. One person withstood 199 consecutive days of being harassed in his neighborhood, and thankfully his neighbors rallied around him and helped him defeat the harassers. At one point, the IRS was debating whether they should be considered a religion, otherwise they would have been hit with back taxes. And during the process of this, it was all wrapped around a lawsuit. The lawsuit was actually won by a plaintiff, but it was overturned because during the debate, her lawyer had said that they were a terrorist group, which of course they couldn't prove. And at that minute, the leaders of their cult were having a meeting. One of the people said, "I'm going to kill her. I don't care if I get the chair. It's just one life." Because he'd convinced his cult members that they were going to be reborn again and again. And if you were a Scientologist, you would continue your growth into the future. And yet, using violence was not a problem. He had them signing billion-year contracts. So as a religion, it's absolutely abhorrent. It is everything about organized religion that I hate and despise. These people are right up there with the Catholics. Maybe worse than the Catholics, because the Catholics, at least to the best of my knowledge, don't send out teams of harassers. They're less litigious than the Scientologists. Now, one of the things that you have to remember is the Scientologists call themselves Scientologists with the word science in there. They purport that they are the most scientific faith in the world. Guess what? This will not come as a surprise to you. That's bullshit. Hubbard thought that the universe was 4 quadrillion years old, and that some violations of human rights that happened 73 million years ago in a different galaxy were somehow affecting us here on Earth today. He felt that aliens flew spaceships that looked remarkably like DC-8s, and they drove cars that looked just like ours. Now, some people say, well, he believed it, so it had to have been a true religion. I think what it was is that he got lost in the world building the way Tolkien got lost in his world building. At the end of Tolkien's life, he became a curator of the world he had created. And I believe that L. Ron Hubbard did the same thing. He got lost in the creation of his own world. He was deeply mentally unhealthy. And he was an alcoholic. He was an addict to nicotine. He was in horrible condition physically. He was paranoid. He was a megalomaniacal narcissist. He was a racist. He was an anti-Semite. He was a misogynist. Now, remember, everything Hubbard said or wrote, every word that Hubbard said or wrote is considered objective truth by the Church of Scientology. So when he had said horribly bigoted, hateful things, they said, well, we know someone stuck that in there. Who? Who stuck that in there? And when they have loyal members of their church that they hold up as examples and exemplars of what a human being can become through Scientology, and they say these people have reached this wonderful level of advancement and development, operating Thetan number 3 or something. And yet, when these people blow and defect and start telling the world of what really goes on inside this twisted, sick, toxic cult, suddenly Scientology says, well, they're inveterate liars. They're adulterers, and they're alcoholics, and they're homosexuals. Oh, yes, he was also anti-gay, is driving one of his own children to suicide because of this. Not only did he drive him to suicide, but the guy his son tried to completely strip himself of any identity so they could not identify his body. Naked in a car with a hose from the tailpipe, with no clothes, with no identifying tags on the car. The only reason they were able to figure it out because there was a smog sticker on the back that had information on it that he didn't realize could be traced back to the car he was in. Hubbard was a morally bankrupt asshole, and the church he's founded is nothing but a reflection of him. And their current guy who's in charge with David Muscovy or something, he's a violent sociopath. And whatever all the affidavits that the church puts forward saying how all the church is a wonderful thing, well, the people who have left, some of them have been those that signed those affidavits, and they said, we were lying. I would have signed anything at that point in my career inside the church. They have slave labor. They put people into in confinement for years at a time. Living in communal groups as many 50 people in a trailer with no bedding. Eating out of slop buckets of leftovers from the rest of the Scientologists who aren't in the hole. This is a cult. It is a toxic entity. And this book is depressing. But he backs it all up. And the church doesn't because they can't. Because it is a faith based on lies. It is a con. Bilking people out of hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single person's treatments within the church. Do they have this device called an e-meter? That's you hold little tubes in your hand and a little needle and they question you it? Yeah. It's based on the lie detector, which is bullshit. Even the man that invented the lie detector will tell you a lie detector is bullshit. All it checks is galvanic responses. That's it. It doesn't know anything about your thinking or anything about your feeling. It checks galvanic responses. The person doing the auditing is making that thing mean anything it wants to just to get information. And they get information out of you, they put it in your dossier, and they use that to blackmail you with. Hubbard was a horrible human being. His church is horrible. And if you have any information you need to know about Scientology, I recommend this book. But be prepared for a depressing slog, even though it is a well-written slog. So, I have a question for anybody out there who knows anything about Scientology. Does this make me a suppressive person, or am I a covert hostile?